He thought the question was harmless. A tired father's attempt to make his daughters laugh. "Pick anything you want," he said. He never imagined their answer would reach across centuries of pain, love, and survival, or that choosing one woman would force him to choose who he really was. Stay with this story, because by the end, you'll realize the bravest families aren't the ones born whole, they're the ones willing to be remade. When his daughters pointed at the woman everyone else avoided and said, "We want her," the room went silent, because some choices don't just change a family, they expose everything a town has tried to forget. Matthew Hale never planned to raise his daughters alone. Life had not asked his permission when it stripped his home of laughter, of warmth, of a woman who once sang while folding laundry. Cancer does not negotiate, and grief does not leave quietly. It settles into the walls, into the morning routines, into the way children stop asking questions because they learn adults don't have answers. Lily was 10, thoughtful beyond her years, with eyes that searched faces for truth. Emma was 7, all fire and curiosity, the kind of child who asked why until the world either made sense or gave up. Matthew loved them fiercely, but love, he was learning, did not replace presence. He cooked, cleaned, worked, and tried to smile, yet every night ended the same way, with two small bodies pressed against him on the couch, watching documentaries because bedtime stories hurt too much now. That evening, rain rattled the windows as an old local history program flickered on the screen. It was about the Apache people, filmed near the desert lands just outside town. The narrator spoke of resilience, displacement, and women who carried entire cultures forward while the world tried to erase them. Matthew barely listened. His mind was on bills, deadlines, and the growing distance he feared between himself and his daughters. Then Emma asked, "Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart. If you could pick anything in the world, what would you pick?" He smiled weakly. "Sleep." They laughed. For a moment, it felt normal. "Safe. Okay," he said, trying to keep the mood light. "Your turn. Pick anything you want." Lily leaned forward, studying the screen. The camera lingered on a woman standing near a fire, her long dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined not with age but with stories. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if every step mattered. "We want that," Lily said. Matthew blinked. "That what?" Emma pointed. "That Apache woman. We want her as our mom." The words landed like a dropped plate. Sharp, final, impossible to ignore. Matthew laughed reflexively. "Girls, that's not." "She looks strong," Emma insisted. "She looks like she wouldn't leave," Lily added quietly. That was when the laughter died. Matthew looked at his daughters and realized they weren't joking. Children, in their honesty, rarely are. They had not asked for a replacement. They had asked for safety. For someone who looked like she knew how to survive loss without disappearing. The documentary ended, but the silence stayed. Days passed, yet the image of that woman haunted him. Not because the idea was absurd, but because it wasn't. He began researching, telling himself it was curiosity. He learned her name was Nayeli Yazzie, an Apache cultural educator who lived on the edge of the reservation, known for teaching language classes and helping troubled youth. People in town spoke of her in careful tones. Different, reserved, not one of us. Matthew told himself to forget it. But forgetting was something his daughters were no longer willing to do. They asked about her every day. So one Saturday morning, Matthew drove toward the desert, unsure whether he was chasing hope or making a mistake he couldn't undo. She had survived loss, erasure, and betrayal. But when a broken man and two grieving girls asked her to stay, she faced the hardest choice of all, whether love was worth trusting again. Nayeli Yazzie did not trust strangers, especially ones who arrived with nervous smiles and rehearsed explanations. When Matthew introduced himself, she listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she looked at the girls. "You didn't choose me," she said gently. "You saw a story on a screen." Emma shook her head. "No, we saw someone who stays standing." That stopped Nayeli cold. She had lost her husband to violence, her son to addiction, her land to laws written by people who never learned her name. She had rebuilt herself from ashes more times than she could count. Strength, to her, was not a gift, it was a burden. I am not here to fill a hole, Nayeli said. Lily stepped forward. We're not holes. We're just unfinished. Something broke open then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Nayeli agreed to visit. Just once. Once became dinners. Dinners became stories. Stories became laughter, hesitant at first, then freer. She taught the girls Apache words for courage, for family, for grief that does not disappear but changes shape. Matthew learned to listen instead of fixing, to sit with discomfort instead of rushing past it. The town watched. Some judged, some whispered, but the girls bloomed. And one evening, months later, Nayeli stood in Matthew's doorway as the sun dipped low, painting the sky the color of forgiveness. I didn't want to be chosen, she said softly, but I want to choose. The family they formed was not perfect. It was better. It was honest, built not on replacement, but on respect. Years later, Lily would say, our mom taught us that love doesn't arrive the way you expect. Emma would add, sometimes love looks like someone the world overlooked. And Matthew would finally understand that when he said pick anything you want, his daughters had picked the bravest thing of all, a future rooted in truth, resilience, and the courage to belong. Just when their home began to feel whole, the outside world knocked, and it did not come with kindness. Belonging, Matthew learned, was easier inside four walls than beyond them. The town that had watched from a distance now leaned closer, curious and uncomfortable. At school, questions turned sharp. Is she really your mom? Why does she dress like that? Isn't she different? Lily absorbed the comments quietly, storing them away like stones in her pockets. Emma fought back, words tumbling out too fast, too fierce. Matthew felt rage rise in him, rage at a world that demanded explanations for love. Nayeli saw it all. She said nothing at first. Then one evening, she gathered them at the table and spoke calmly. The world will try to decide who we are, she said. We decide first. She began volunteering at the school, teaching history not found in textbooks. She spoke of survival, of erased names, of women who held families together when laws tried to tear them apart. Slowly, faces softened. Not all, but enough. Resistance didn't vanish, but it weakened. And the girls learned something powerful. Standing tall doesn't mean standing alone. Just as peace settled in, Nayeli's past returned and threatened to take her away for good. A letter arrived one morning, thin but heavy with consequence. A land dispute, an old claim, a reminder that history never stays buried. If Nayeli fought it, she might lose everything she'd rebuilt. If she walked away, she would be safe, but far from the family she had chosen. Matthew offered solutions. Lawyers, money, promises. Nayeli shook her head. Some battles must be faced, not escaped. The girls listened from the hallway, fear clinging to them like cold. That night, Lily cried for the first time in years. Emma asked the question they all feared. Is she leaving us too? Nayeli knelt before them. I am fighting for you, she said. Not against us. For weeks, uncertainty ruled. Courtrooms replaced classrooms. Silence replaced laughter. Then the ruling came. She won. Not just the land, but recognition. Respect. A voice. And when Nayeli returned home, dusty and exhausted, the girls ran to her like roots reclaiming soil. She never gave birth to them, yet she taught them how to live. Motherhood, Nayeli believed, was not about blood. It was about showing up when fear whispered retreat. She taught Lily to speak when silence felt safer. She taught Emma patience when anger burned hot. She taught Matthew that strength could be gentle. Traditions blended. Apache songs mixed with old lullabies Matthew's wife once sang. Grief was honored, not erased. Photos stayed on walls. Memories stayed alive. One night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Lily asked, "Can you be more than one thing?" Nayeli smiled. That is the only way to be whole. The family they became did not replace the past. It carried it forward. Years later, when asked how they became a family, the answer was simple, but never easy. At Lily's graduation, Nayeli sat in the front row. At Emma's first debate competition, she cheered the loudest. At Matthew's side, she stood not as a symbol, but as a partner. People stopped asking questions. Or rather, the questions changed. How did you make it work? How did you know? Matthew always answered the same way. We listened. Because love didn't arrive as a miracle. It arrived as a decision made again and again. Family is not defined by sameness, comfort, or expectation. It is defined by courage. The courage to choose one another despite fear, history, and judgment. When those girls said, "We want that Apache woman as our mom," they weren't asking for perfection. They were asking for truth, strength, and someone brave enough to stay. And sometimes, the most powerful families are formed not by birth, but by belief. If this story touched you, remember this. Love does not need permission. It only needs commitment.